The Redfields, the last name that is synonymous with the Resident Evil franchise, with the two family members being Chris and Claire, where both had such a big impact in their respective games and cameos, as we follow their countless adventures, always providing us with the pinnacle of their survival horror genre. So in this video, we'll be discussing both Chris and Claire Redfield, and discuss their overall background, concept as a character, and their overall storyline and why they were such an integral part to the Resident Evil series. We'll also even discuss how they played their role during the Raccoon City incident in Resident Evil 2 and 3, and how they could make cameos in the potential Resident Evil 3 remake. Anyways, before we do get started with the video, I just want to say my name is DeVuH, and I do cover a lot of Resident Evil and The Last of Us content on my channel. So if you guys enjoy that type of content, then please feel free to like and subscribe to my channel for more videos like this in the future, and possibly adding me on Instagram and Twitter, where you guys can message me there at any time. Alright, so let's kick off this video starting with Chris Redfield, where we can discuss his overall concept art and why he was designed the way he was. So if we go all the way back in the Resident Evil history, we learned that the development of the first RE game stemmed from Shinji Mikami's influence, where a survival horror game was to be developed and creating a cast of protagonists that would be followed inside a haunted mansion. So here's where we go and discuss how Chris Redfield came to be, which he was designed to be this tough guy type of character who was supposed to be very muscular in stature and would be the front point man when it came to this survival horror game. With his overall design and aesthetic was supposed to complement the other cast members, which included Jill Valentine and the removed concept game characters of Dewey and Gelzer, where Chris was supposed to differ from the rest of the cast from his color scheme of green to his stature and body build. Also, like I mentioned earlier, the whole tough guy concept still made its way to the original RE1, where they still depicted Chris smoking a cigarette with his nonchalant type of attitude. But the remake version of Resident Evil 1 would tone this aspect down a bit and would have him depicted like this instead, normalizing his overall stature, which helps with that feeling of helplessness and tension when we play RE1. Anyways, let's go ahead and move on to Claire Redfield and discuss how she was created as a character and what drastic changes they made during her concept creation, which goes all the way back to the development of Resident Evil 2. But for Claire's case, she started off as a completely different character, which this character was known as Elza Walker, a college-age student who, like Claire, enjoyed riding motorcycles. Also, her overall concept art would originally depict her having blonde hair and wearing a full-body racing suit, which was given a true homage in Resident Evil 2 Remake, where we had the option to play as Claire wearing the same exact outfit. Anyways, Elza Walker's overall story and role would be similar to Claire's, which was stated by the Resident Evil 2 development team, but after scrapping the original version of RE2, which is now famously known as Resident Evil 1.5, Elza Walker would now cease to exist, and instead we have Claire Redfield finally born, where, like I mentioned earlier, that she had many traits that are similar to Elza's, which is the most prominent of this is her use of a motorcycle. Anyways, overall, the depiction of Claire Redfield in the classic RE2 had her as a college student as well, but this time would go on looking for her brother Chris Redfield at Raccoon City, not knowing that the T-virus infection has already taken most of the population. Anyways, with both characters' background and concept development covered, let's go ahead and discuss how they made such a big impact in their respective games, starting with Chris Redfield again, where he played as one of the main protagonists of RE1, where him and the rest of the RPD STARS members were tasked to investigate some bizarre murders at the Arklay Mountains, only to find out that the area was infested with zombies and monsters. Anyways, as the story goes, Chris Redfield would find himself fighting against the many creatures inside the Spencer mansion, and eventually escaping by the end of RE1. Where him and the rest of the surviving members of STARS arrived back at Raccoon City, but instead of being met with praise, they instead were ridiculed about their tales of zombies and monsters at the Spencer mansion. So in the original storyline, Chris would set out and go to the Umbrella headquarters in Europe, trying to find a way to take down this evil pharmaceutical giant, while Claire would go on ahead and play her storyline in Resident Evil 2 and RE2 Remake, where she would fight against a mutated William Birkin and the infamous T-103 tyrant, Mr. X.
What is that?
Did he just come through the roof?
do we do?
Just run!
It's coming after us!
Also along the way, she meets up with Leon Kennedy, one of the main protagonists of this franchise, and Sherry Birkin, which this plays out as one of the best games in the franchise, watching both Leon and Claire fight their way through the RPD station to making their way to the Umbrella secret lab, where we also get to see them destroy William Birkin in one of the best cutscenes from the original Resident Evil 2.
Sherry? What are you doing?
We have to stop the train, right? I can do it.
But come and get me. I'm right here.
But Claire's adventure would still continue, where she would leave Sherry to Leon's care while she continues her search for Chris, which I thought was kinda cold considering how much both her and Sherry have bonded during their journey in RE2, with one of the epilogue panels showing Claire walking away from the two, and it was odd that Leon pushed her away as well, which this portion makes me think it wasn't completely canon, and that the true story was that they were intercepted by the US military and separated from one another, where they bargained with Leon to become a US federal agent, while Sherry being held captive due to her exposure to the G virus, and Claire was set free where she would continue her search for her brother and lead her to a new adventure in Resident Evil Code Veronica, where at long last, both siblings finally meet each other. So overall, these two will still continue to have such a significant role for the next several games and CGI movies. But like I mentioned earlier, we'll just be talking about how they played their role during the Raccoon City incident, and we can speculate on how Chris can have a role in Resident Evil 3 Remake, because remember that Chris left before Jill's escape during RE3, and I found that interesting that these two decided to split up, especially after what happened in the Spencer mansion during RE1, because it would have been a better idea to tag team during Resident Evil 3 and try to fight off as many monsters as they can. Also at the same time, they could possibly help many citizens in Raccoon City during this catastrophe, similar to how we met so many characters in Resident Evil Outbreak. Anyways, going back to Claire, I just want to clarify which version that we'd see during the Raccoon City incident, because remember that her Dark Side Chronicles version was more combat verse, stating that Chris used to help her train when she was younger, so that would change the dynamic of her being a plain college girl who just happens to be right in the middle of a zombie disaster. Anyways, going back to Chris, where in this version, he would lean more towards what we saw from Resident Evil 1 Remake, where his build isn't as crazy as in RE5 or RE6, still retaining that grounded and realistic version, because the last thing we would want to see is this. Anyways, like I said, these two had such a big impact during their respective games, even with the many different iterations that we've seen these two go through, which I'll be discussing more in a future video. So if you guys want me to cover more of their different versions for future games, then please let me know in the comment section down below. Anyways, in the end, these two would help make the Resident Evil franchise one of the best out there, and I would love to see either one make a cameo in a potential Resident Evil 3 remake. Anyways, I hope you guys enjoyed the content, and please don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel for more Resident Evil content in the future. And also, thank you guys so much, and as always, you guys have a great rest of your day, and this is Hey DeVuH, signing out.
I'll keep her busy. Just go for the emergency elevator.
Chris, but
I can take care of this. Just go.
you have to make it. Don't die on me.